Our next speaker is Dr. Lokesh Lingappa, consultant pediatric neurologist from Rainbow Children Hospital. He is the head of the department of pediatric neurology at Rainbow Children Hospital. He is the secretary of Pediatric Epilepsy Society of Hyderabad, president IAP Pediatric Neurology Chapter, and president of Child Neurology Group, Hyderabad. His research interests range from neonatal neurology to infantile epilepsy and intensive care and neurogenetics. Today, he will be sharing with us his expert talk on pediatric neurology tips for practicing pediatricians. With that, I would like to ask you to pay full attention to Dr. Lokesh Lingappa and help me welcoming him to the webinar. Dr. Lokesh.
Yeah, thank you, Shrikant, for that introduction. And so this is what I was thinking over the period of the COVID-19. I've used this platform, so I've really become an expert in webinar. I think you people have been very patiently with tens of webinars every day on offer. You have been wanting to listen to us. Thank you for that. And in fact, when I was thinking about this topic, probably we can have one more session wherein we would request all of you to send your questions, email us. We'll pool them and make a talk based on that. So what are the questions in your practical, what do you face practically in your pediatric practice, which is concerned to each specialty can be. For me, it will be pediatric neurology, obviously. So you can write down the questions, post it to us. So maybe we can have half an hour or 45-minute session based on your questions, which is of relevance to all of you on a day-to-day basis. So as a pediatrician, when you see a child with a neurological complaint, they come with a wide range of challenges. It also boils down to what is the kind of training you have been through, what is the setup of work currently you are working, whether it's predominantly acute care work, outpatient care of neurologically afflicted children. And you have to take decision based on that 5-minute, 10-minute interaction with the families and be right in those decisions. So these are the various challenges when we see a child, a family coming with a neurological problem. Some of them are very straightforward. Some of them have lots of issues. I hope I'm audible because I'm connected through phone. Hello? Okay. So outline, we'll go through. The first thing is history. I think 80% of information is available before you touch the patient. So I think paying good attention to what the parent has to say, if the child is good at what the child is able to say, gives us most of the information. And examination should be limited and focused in the outpatient to just make sure that it gives essential information based on what is the history. So many of us are aware of this concept of handle in the history in the clinical examination. So in the history, usually if there is a clear history of regression, obviously that starts ringing a red bell into you that you are dealing with something very significant. Similarly, clinical examination, if there is something very diagnostic, like you have a cherry red spot in a child, your list of clinical differential diagnosis immediately narrows down. So that is what is called as concept of handle in the history. So you need to look out for those things while you are actually taking the history and the examination. And while we are taking the history, simultaneously look at what the child is doing, how is he interacting with observations, and how is he greeting, accepting the greeting, whether he is waving by, and interaction with the parents, social gestures. All those things need to be documented as we are talking to the parents. And I will just go through a few themes of neurological presentation. So which will be seizure or epilepsy, developmental delay or speech delays, headaches, torticollis, infant with visual impairment, floppy infant, just as a theme. When you see them, how to just quickly go through a few things. It may not be exhaustive. It is just as a few important points. So while assessing higher mental function and speech in these children, just ask for name, school, class, friends, ask them to write down their names. So that will be able to quickly assess his writing skills, hand grip, his memory, all those things can be quickly assessed on the clinic time. And orientation to time, place, and person, general knowledge questions, whatever is relevant to the age and educational status of the child. And if they are able to tell rhymes, or that will usually able to assess the fluency of the speech. Note down the handedness, coordination, and pencil grips, etc. So cranial nerves as well, can you ask them to quickly read something, identify color, and get a torchlight to look at the pupils quickly. Facial symmetry, nasolabial folds while crying, and response to name, and whether the child runs to TV during the advertisement, during the history, you can get that information. And motor system examination, quickly you can look at the lateralizing signs, look for any pronator drift, finger hand coordination, writing down Archimedes spiral, which will help to know the hand grip. And if there is a tremor, that will be very clearly exacerbated in what is called as the Archimedes spiral. And just make them to keep their hands outstretched, which will bring out the tremors and dystonias quite well. So, and definitely make sure you get if the child is able to walk, make the child walk across the clinic setting. That will pick us any abnormalities. Make sure that you have taken off the socks, taken off the shoes, and then make the child walk, so that any of the dystonias, any of the plantiflections and inversion, eversion, all those things you will be missing if they are walking with the shoes or sandals on. And when they are trying to sit up from the lying, just look at whether the neck should come along with the trunk. So if there is a lag of it, then there is evidence of neck flexion, neck flexion weakness is there. And if the child is trying to turn to side and then get up, then there is a truncal weakness. So these things are subtle, and you can just pick it up even without you actually having to touch the patient. Gait, as I said, it is very important when we are examining neurologically. Just make sure you have done a quick gait check. Free walking, heel walking, toe walking, and tandem gait, and getting up from floor. So once you have done, this will cover up most of the basic clinical information. When the child is not cooperative, it is easy to just ask the parent to go out, ask the child to run around and do activities. Once they are out of your chamber, they are completely free again. They'll do all the activities. So ask the parents to get the videos and see you again. So these are some of the video. So it's very obvious, I think, for all of you what's happening here. So this is an infant who was premature, and then had come with this gait disturbances. So that is toe walking. So it's a clear spastic diplegia. Premature baby spent some time in an ICU, periventricular leukomalacia. So once you see that type of gait, it is very clear. If the same kind of gait is there, walking on toes with exaggerated lumbar lordosis, waddling gait in a 5-year-old boy, then with a calf hypertrophy, obviously the differential will be Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. So the toe walking with other associated things will be a different diagnosis in a 5-year-old with calf hypertrophy, whereas a child with prematurity and walking like this, spend time in an ICU, it will be a different diagnosis. Here it is a spastic diplegia secondary to periventricular leukomalacia. So this is a girl child who had been on 3 anti-epileptics for some of these movements. I will not show you the whole video. So she used to have lots of jerks. We couldn't observe anything. 2 EEGs were completely normal and developmentally normal child. No abnormalities noted. Maybe this video will show things better. Just observe her trunk and the hand very closely. Just the sudden jerk of the hand. It's a dystonic movement. She is not losing her consciousness. She is. You can see that jerk. Just that jerk, which is seen. You can see that now better. So our video EEG was completely normal. You can see that the whole body and the trunk going back and hand going into dystonic posturing. So it was on both the sides. It was seen on both the sides. So this child had an unusual diagnosis called myoclonus dystonia. Why I'm showing this video, I'm not trying to show an unusual diagnosis. It is just that we couldn't pick up anything on examination in the consultation. All the MRI, EEG, everything was normal. Only this video actually gave us a diagnosis of a condition called myoclonic dystonia syndrome, which is a genetic condition, monogenic condition. So it is extremely important to get this kind of information so that you can solve the problem in a more clear manner, because this child had been seen and had been on anti-epileptics. Myoclonic dystonia doesn't respond to many of the anti-epileptic medications. They require either oxcarbazepine or even clonazepam. Those are the drugs which might help, and they have a very longish course. It is important to have goal-directed complaints according to the presenting symptoms. If it is epilepsy, obviously ask for what is the episode, duration, what time of the night or day it is happening, and if there are videos, that is the most useful thing, as we saw earlier. And what is the age at onset, what is the frequency, are there triggers? And as a clinician, pediatrician, or a neurologist, first and foremost, what we should make sure is they are epileptic seizures. Because before starting medication, that is the first thing. Whether they are epileptic seizures, if you are not convinced, get more and more information before starting anti-epileptic medication. One of the clues for it being non-epileptic in children between 8 to 14 years is the child has unexplained prolonged absence from school. So they come for infrequent episodes, paroxysmal events, jerking or falling. And then when you ask, how is the school going? They say the school is not gone to school for last 1 month or 2 months. So most of the organic complaints, the parents, the kids generally try to go to school most of the times. In most of the non-epileptic, what we call psychogenic non-epileptic events, you get an unexplained prolonged absence from school. That history actually is quite corroborative in more than 95% of the children who have psychogenic non-epileptic events, which is common between 8 to 14 years of age. So I think some of you must have seen, lots of these children are treated as spasms. It is a common thing, which is a common variation of development, which is seen. You can shoot out your answers. So awake child, alert, doing these episodes multiple per day, no loss of consciousness, EEG is normal. And once you see this video, actually you shouldn't do an EEG or any other investigations. They're all during the awake period, and you can they can reproduce it as the child was doing here. We'll show this again. So just stiffening, alert, completely conscious. It's a shuddering episode. Even today we get consults at least 2-3 a month for these sort of problems in a developmentally normal child. So these are shuddering episodes, don't require any investigations or treatment further. So what are these movements? The child is trying, turning side to side. There is a 6-month-old child who has this movement. Are they epileptic, non-epileptic? You can shoot out your answers in the chat box. Okay, it is just an exercise for all of us. We are not scoring you. So it just stops and looks alert immediately. So generally what you should observe is the seizures are along the axis, axial axis. Flexion extension kind of jerking is what usually happens. Whenever there is a side-to-side movement like this, they are more likely to be motor stereotypic. So this is a motor stereotypic behavior, which is more common when the child has some form of neurological issues, not commonly seen in children who are completely neurologically normal. So it indicates there is some degree of neurological dysfunction. So when you're taking a history of epilepsy and seizures, antenatal and perinatal history are important. You get the clues most of the times. If there is a neonatal seizures and later on they come with seizures, you know that it's a remote symptomatic etiology. Secondary to perinatal, family history of febrile seizures, afebrile seizures, you are looking at sodium channel mutation. Any regression is always a red herring, so be careful. If regression, consider epileptic encephalopathies, neurodegenerative disorders, and progressive myoclonic encephalopathies. And always document head circumference, not just for this child. Any child who walks into clinic, you are vaccinating, just make sure you plot the head circumference and anthropometry, and just keep following it up. Many times when we see this child at 6 months, and we are trying to see whether the head circumference is growing postnatally or along the graph, we don't have a reference many a times. So I think all of us as pediatricians, we should just make sure just plot it even in a busy clinic. It doesn't take a long time. It can be done quite quickly. Look for any facial asymmetry. Look for neurocutaneous markers. So this is a child actually who came in with 51 days with history suggestive of focal seizures. MRI, CT scan was reported as tuberculoma. Tuberculoma in that age is extremely unusual. What was not picked up is this hypopigmented macules which were there. So these hypopigmented macules obviously will direct you towards that calcified spots were part of tuberous sclerosis. And you can see the plaque here. This is also part of your tuberous sclerosis complex, and in a child who is older. So this is also called PUDRH. Once you have this kind of clues, you know that your etiology is very clear. This is a linear varicose nerve syndrome, a rarer condition with hemimegalencephaly with refractory epilepsy. So some of these things, because both the brain and skin develop from the same part in the fetal development. So any of these clues in the skin will be very good handle for us. I think this one we must have seen already many times. Any infant presenting with epilepsy which is refractory to anti-epileptics, even otherwise, if you see a dry, scaly skin flaking along with sparse hair, always think of biotinidase deficiency, most effectively treatable condition. So your skin, head circumference, hairs, all these things give a clue. So if the skin is hypopigmented as compared to parental hair, and the child has epileptic spasms and developmental delay, it could be phenylketonuria. So like that, as a clinician, you can pick up and direct your investigations quite a lot. So now coming to the next theme, quick this one, I'm not going to go into details. Evaluation of developmental delay, I think as on an everyday basis, we see them. Most of the time, the etiology is available on the history. Either the child has perinatal asphyxia, severe IUGR, or had a STOMI neonatal course, required ventilation, intraventricular hemorrhage, those kind of things, you don't have to investigate for the etiology. But if those things are not there, if there is a family history, you are looking at a genetic condition. If there is a consanguinity, autosomal recessive conditions are much more common in our communities as compared to Western world. So look for any dysmorphism that will be a clear clue that it is a genetic condition. Once again, anthropometry, you have a child with macrocephaly, has body weight and height are also on the higher side, and broad front, broad forehead. So something like Sotos syndrome. So your documentation of anthropometry itself is giving you a clue towards your diagnosis. Your neurological examination may not give much of information, but just that you have a macrocephaly, you have macrosomia, you are looking at possibly a diagnosis of Sotos syndrome. So that's how important to pick up these things and document in your day-to-day practice. So if you have all the clinodactyly, syndactyly, or polydactyly, which are non-familial in nature, then they are more important. There are a lot of families who have sort of polydactyly as part of their running in the family, but they may not be significant. So this is one child where in one clinical examination in the outpatient, we are able to give a diagnosis, genetic, and do antenatal counseling. That's how you can use your time and their consultation. This is a child 8-month-old who was progressively worsening in his neurological status for last 2 months. And you can see there is a retrocolis. The eyes are not looking up very well. And there is a stiffening of hands, which is there. You can see the eyes, there is a convergence as well. And he had a stridor. So this is what our trainee presented. So there is a regression and there is a retrocolis and vertical gaze abnormalities. So with this itself, we can start thinking of what are the differentials. You can see the upper part of sclera is very clearly seen. So which indicates a upgaze paresis, vertical upgaze paresis. So you have vertical gaze paresis with stridor and retrocolis. What they didn't examine properly was that there was also splenomegaly. Now you have a very easy, what we are talking of as a concept of handle in clinical diagnosis. So once you have splenomegaly with this sort of thing, your differential diagnosis are very narrowed down. So what are your differential diagnoses here then? You can type them while we go through. So we diagnosed this as neuronopathic Gaucher. We sent a blood spot for genetic testing, which was offered for the enzymatic assessment. Within a week's time after the child went home, the child died. So after that, we had a confirmed diagnosis of Gaucher in a week's time. And then when the parents came for antenatal testing, we did the carrier screening for both the parents, and we could give antenatal counseling for the family. So this is just one clinic visit, putting things together, analyzing them, and testing for most appropriate one diagnosis. It doesn't happen all the time. I think it's our awareness and trying to use the clinical information as accurately as possible is going to be making a huge difference to the family. So if this is an infant with loss of eye contact, motor regression, and organomegaly. So what are these here? These are your exaggerated Mongolian spots. They are all over the body, normally just over the lower back. Here it's exaggerated all over the place. So it indicates most of the times storage disorder. It can be seen in MPS and gangliosidosis. Along with that, if you have this child had GM1 gangliosidosis, the dysostosis and the organomegaly are all very clear indicators towards this condition. So you don't need actually too many investigations. You can just either do a genetic diagnosis if this is the first child. You don't need a scan. You don't need other many blood tests or any other thing. So this is another infant who had neuroregression. Just carefully observe the video. So you can see that there is a startle to a sound, another startle. So there was an exaggerated startle, slightly head size which is on the upper side of normal, regression. You will not have any other clues. And then once you see this startle, your differential diagnosis quickly narrows down, isn't it? Audiogenic startle. So you ask for cherry red spot. If you find a cherry red spot, you have a diagnosis, Tay-Sachs disease. All you have to do is test for one single thing. So you have used your clinical skills to narrow down to very narrow differential. The child came with a very vague regression of milestones. But you using your clinical information has narrowed it down to one clinical differential diagnosis at the bedside. That's the beauty how you can use your clinical information. So I would request all of you during the vaccination visit, please document the head circumference. Document what is the development. Very quick, this one, age appropriate, 1 or 2 lines is good enough. And make sure one comment of joint eye contact. If the children start looking at, they start smiling and having eye contact by around 3 months of age. And if the child even at 9 months is not making eye contact, is very aloof, then it is a very early sign that this child could be developing autism. So, and attention to name call. Most of the times the babies start looking at the name call quite quickly. So if the child you call 4 times, there is auditory agnosia, no response to call with a normal hearing, then you are concerned. So because I think as pediatricians today, you can't escape but see a child with autism very regularly, depending on where you are practicing. I think for us, we see around 3 to 4 new children every day almost as a team. And so that is the load of autism what we are seeing. 1 in 50 in US and probably 1 in 100 in India is what people project. So I think if you pick up that early, start very interventions early, stop the gadgets, make sure the parents don't use gadgets too much early on. What is recommended is not to use gadgets until sort of they are 3 years of age, ideally. So any gadget usage should be supervised by the parents, not just giving to the child, allowing it to play. That actually causes only one-way interaction and reduces the social interaction. It is not a cause of autism, but it will definitely reduce the interaction significantly. Okay, so coming to another complaint which we might see regularly is torticollis. So some of the questions which will help is whether it is from birth. If it is from birth, whether it is fixed to one side, then you are looking at sternomastoid tumor, or there is cervical spine structural abnormality. So they are fixed to side. And if they are variable, then even the eye movement abnormality or fourth nerve palsies can give rise to abnormal neck movement. So which might improve significantly with a surgical intervention, minor surgical intervention. So we need to look at whether there is a sternomastoid tumor. If it is very fixed, look at the spine abnormalities. And also get an eye evaluation to make sure the eye movements are normal. Get a good pediatric eye evaluation, because this is sometimes very subtle to pick up the isolated fourth nerve abnormalities, which can be congenital in origin. But if it is fluctuant and paroxysmal, you are looking at paroxysmal dystonias, which are rarely seen in children. In normal developing children as well, it can be seen, or as a part of generalized dystonias. one important thing we should never miss is a new onset torticollis. The child was completely fine until 2 years of age. Now in last 15 days, the child is keeping neck to one side. That will worry me because the common causes are posterior fossa malformations, posterior fossa tumors, which is causing a impingement of the sort of early ankle herniation, not the ankle herniation, your central herniation, which will cause this torticollis. So any new onset torticollis in a child who never had it, take it seriously, investigate it with the MRI. So that's very important to be noted. These are some of the eye movements which might give a clue. I'll not spend too much of time. I think I'm taking too much of time here. So you can see this this bigger girl where the kind of head thrust. You can see to try to move, she's turning her head rather than the eyes. This is the classical oculomotor apraxia. So that is usually a sign commonly seen in older children with ataxia telangiectasia. Obviously, this child doesn't have telangiectasia and she has developmental delay from beginning. So Joubert syndrome or inherited branchiolopathy is one of the most common condition to give rise to this kind of eye movement abnormalities, oculomotor apraxia. So other complaint you see is infant with visual impairment. So any child is not fixing and following 4th month, 5th month, you start worrying, parents come to you. So as a clinician, you need to make a differentiation between whether it's a cerebral visual impairment versus the anterior visual pathway abnormality. Usually anterior visual pathway abnormalities, as you all know, will have some degree of optic atrophy, pupillary signs, afferent pupillary defect, and you might have a lesion in the sort of pituitary region, which can also give rise to anterior pathway defects. If there is a normal anterior pathway, but still has visual impairment, mild motor and cognitive delay might be there. And the child, if you take the history, the child keeps pressing on the eye repeatedly, which is called the eye poking sign, is commonly seen with condition called Leber's congenital amaurosis. So these are the few things you can look at. So when the child has cerebral visual impairment, that has cognitive with visual regression, think of epileptic encephalopathy. All children with cerebral visual impairment mandatory to get an EEG done because there are hypserhythmic EEGs or epileptic encephalopathic EEGs. If you treat them, there can be significant improvement in the vision. Always perform a EEG. And if you are not sure, depending on the reason, you can get the MRI and treat accordingly. So this is a question for you all. This is a 2-year, 6-month-old child. Visual impairment noted at around 4 to 5 months of age. He has been seen by doctors. He had an MRI done, 2 MRIs done, normal. Cognition is normal. Some hearing issues. So looking at this child, just suggest me what test will give you the diagnosis. I'll now start, you can start typing your answers. So here you can see there is a very broad forehead, slightly deep eyes, and his arms were slightly prominent, which was seen. I think this was the main thing. There is a disconjugate eyes because there is not much of fixation. This is a good clue in a child who is cognitively normal but is visually impaired, anterior visual pathway defect. There is a degree of optic atrophy which was documented. So anterior visual pathway. So what is this? X-ray. What does it show? There is no marrow cavity. It's a, what is the condition? Osteopetrosis. So in the severe forms, you have hepatosplenomegaly, which is florid, all cytopenias, which is very easy to pick up sometimes, where they have very progressive downhill course. But these are the ones which are slightly milder, intermediate forms, wherein they can present because of the canalicular narrowing, optic canal narrowing. So they just compress the optic nerve. They compress the auditory nerve, causing hearing impairment, visual impairment. So if you pick them up early and do a genetic diagnosis, some of them are amenable to hematocell stem cell treatment. Not all of them, at least 30 to 40% of them you can rescue early on. So that's osteopetrosis. Last one is floppy infant. I know I'm running out of time, but I'll just cover this last part. So if there is a floppy infant, you have questions to ask, whether it's onset from birth. So Prader-Willi syndrome, which will have difficulty in swallowing, significant hypotonia, no perinatal problems. Congenital myotonic dystrophy, wherein there is in this sort of situation, if you examine the mother, because of the phenomena of anticipation is so prominent in myotonic dystrophy, you tend to get mother who is mildly symptomatic, but the child is very severely symptomatic. So if you examine the mother for facial weakness, weakness of the wrist muscles, and atrophy of the distal forearm muscles, that will give us a clue. And if you shake hand with the mother, hold the grip tightly, there might be a degree of myotonia you might make out. And spinal muscular atrophy type 0 can present in the newborn period. Later onset, you can have SMA type 1 is the most common disease, which will present to us as clinicians. So there will be a gradient when they come to us with lower limb more involved than the upper limb, and gradually they will progress. And so any floppy infant, I think one of the most important thing is just look for tongue fasciculations. And if there are tongue fasciculations in a child who is not crying, just look at the under surface of the tongue or the sides of the tongue. On the top surface, you will not make out much. Just look at the under surface or the lateral surface. That is the best place to look at the fasciculations. You will be able to pick them up quite well. And if you don't have tongue fasciculations, child is floppy, progressively worsening. If you have a hepatomegaly, think of Pompe's disease, and X-ray shows large heart, that will further confirm, and it's a diagnosis which can be easily made. And some of the myopathies, congenital myopathies and muscular dystrophies as well, they're not as common as the SMA type 1. And other courses like static brain insults will also present with hypotonia in the neonatal period, like when your kernicterus will be hypotonic in the newborn period and the early infantile period, structural myopathies. And the progressive course obviously will be spinal muscular atrophy and other neurodegenerative disorders. Examination, you make a point of whether it's a proximal versus distal. What is the wasting? Is there contractures, arthrogryposis, multiplex? Then it will be more of congenital dystrophies versus myopathies. If there is a very early respiratory involvement, early diaphragmatic failure, then look at a condition called SMART or mitochondrial. Look at the bulbar dysfunction as well. So once again, anthropometry is always important. You have a child who is IUD or failure to thrive, large for dead babies. So those will give a clue if there is a child who has megalencephaly with sort of floppy infant. You are looking at some of the leukodystrophies which can present like that. A large hydrocephalus can also have a floppiness in the early neonatal period. They will not be spastic very early on. Dysmorphology, once again, as a child with trisomy is very easy to pick up, but there are other dysmorphologic syndromes which once again can present with hypotonia. As we discussed already, organomegaly, Pompe's and other storage disorders, eye evaluation and handshake with the mother, as we said. So very alert child, smiling and floppy, we are looking at a neuromuscular condition. If the facial expressions are reduced, we are looking at congenital myotonic dystrophies and myopathies, but with a normal responsiveness. So congenital myotonic dystrophies, actually children can be slightly encephalopathic as well in the initial period, whereas myopathies will not be. But congenital muscular dystrophies, depending on the type of the genetic defect, they can have seizures, they can have other abnormalities as well. If you look at the cry, if the cry is very weak, then you are looking at a neuromuscular cause. If the cry is poorly consolable, you are looking at a central nervous system cause for the hypotonia. So eye movements, look for any nystagmus, oculomotor, this one, it's like Joubert syndrome, what we discussed earlier. And if you have ptosis, you are looking at congenital myasthenic syndromes or some of the congenital myopathies as well. If the vision fixation is poor, you are looking at a central cause of hypotonia. So your just a cranial nerve examination can give a lot of information and make you differentiate between one or the other. If the breathing is ataxic breathing, Joubert syndrome or posterior fossa structural abnormalities are a common clues. So I think here you can see there is, I hope, child who is alert, who is just moving the distal part, is just moving the foot, but the upper limb movement are better, no anti-gravity movements at the hip, looking around, eye movements are full, no ptosis, head control is very poor, a very alert child. So you're looking at a neuromuscular etiology. look at the pattern of breathing, predominantly diaphragmatic pattern of breathing. So there is a significant intercostal muscle weakness. So this is what happens in spinal muscular atrophy, intercostal muscle weakness, and there is hardly any movements in the limbs. So whereas in spinal muscular atrophy with respiratory distress syndrome, your diaphragm is weak very early. They will have eventration of diaphragm. That way, based on they also have similar age of presentation, but they'll have contractions as well. Okay. So this is another infant who presented with this kind of eyes at 9 months of age, otherwise developmentally normal. After injection neostigmine, these were the eyes. So droopy eyelids at the normal. So although 9 months you start thinking of congenital, but this child has acquired myasthenia. And this is a child with Pompe who was second one to receive the enzyme replacement therapy. So the various differentials and your handles we went through. So formulate a possible differential, site of lesion, whether central versus peripheral. But even today, with differentiating central versus peripheral in some of the children can be very challenging. And pathology, you can be structural, metabolic, or acquired this one, and look at the etiologic differential. Investigations will not go through with the details. So in summary, goal-directed history, complete general physical examination, anthropometry and chart and growth charts, neurological examination to confirm the findings from history. And usually it's a systemic examination and general physical examination along with history, which gives the etiologic diagnosis to you, and which all of you can do very effectively and narrow down the list of differentials. I think we'll stop here and we'll take up any questions if you still have some patience after this.
Thank you, sir. That was a very inspiring presentation.